with digital assets as sort of the value layer that's moving, I think is going to help to, one, save a lot of people money that's hard-earned dollars, right? Like losing 10% or 8% on a transaction because you're sending money home and it's a $200 transaction. Like that's the cost of putting food on your table effectively. That's the cost of your child's education, right? Like these are actually very, very important factors that you're solving by bringing down these costs to ideally sub 3%, even lower, right?
Welcome to Pivoting to Web3 podcast, where experts break down AI, blockchain, and tech shaping our future. I'm Donna, and today's guest has insights you won't want to miss. Let's dive in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Pivoting to Web3 podcast. And today I have Aly Madhavji.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. And Aly has a background that is out of this world in regards to blockchain. He's got a lot of experience in the world of crypto. He's on crypto nights and he's done so many things. I think I prefer him to introduce himself, say how he got into this blockchain space, because all of you know I'm excited about blockchain and what's coming in the economy and everything that's happening now in the convergence. And I don't want to get in the middle of this because it's too much for all of us to learn together. So Aly, say hello to your audience and ours and tell us how you're in the blockchain founders space. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure for being here. And so I'm Aly Madhavji, managing partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. We invest in and help venture build top tier startups in the space. We now have about 200 portfolio companies all around the world that touches, essentially every aspect of this industry. And, it's quite refreshing, being in this space more recently because, of course, over the many years that we've been in the space, there's been a lot of ups and downs, right? And in reality, the space has always, historically been looked at more negatively from the outside. And this might be the first time where you're starting to see, more government endorsement, especially out of the United States. You're seeing more regulatory clarity. You're seeing companies go public around the space. And so right now, there's kind of this huge euphoria. A lot of people are being very excited about seeing other people in the space. And I think you have a whole new wave of people coming into the space, which is exciting to see.
It's exciting to see for sure. For those that are listening and really don't understand what the big hoop-de-doo is about, with the decentralization, the trust, the verification, and everything, can you help us understand what it is about blockchain that is really so phenomenally different, that's taking us to the future in such a fast manner?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple of sort of very critical innovations here that are oftentimes overlooked or not fully understood yet because maybe it's not fully mature, right? But I think when you look at what's really happening here, I think there's a few very critical things, okay? So one is you've got essentially this value layer that's created, right? And you think about the ability to have fully native value transferred in a digital manner. Now, this is critical, right? And this might not seem as critical as you might think today, but look at, where you end up with, very transformational technology shifts in the world is where you've got, multiple incredible technologies that hit a crossroads and together really change the trajectory, right? So you've got AI, for example, you've got, IoT, and you've got blockchain right now. And if you think about all of these coming together and converging, and what does that mean for the world in, say, 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, right? And so what you now have with this value layer is the ability for AI to transact digitally and natively, right? IoT and machine-to-machine communications to happen, fully transparently auditably, right? You think about AI and you've got almost this black box problem in the AI side where like you don't know what actually is inputting into a decision, right? And in reality, that's not going to fly in 10 years from now, right? Like I don't think governments are going to be okay with AI making a decision to kill one family over another because of an accident that's about to happen and it has to make a decision like without that being auditable, right? And so what is the technology that's going to be auditing essentially AI and that sort of record keeping of that? It's going to be on a blockchain, right? And these are tough decisions that AI is going to have to make, that regulators are going to step in like that as soon as this starts to become a problem, and they're going to make sure that this is actually going to be very clear and transparent. And so that, I think, is a very important part that, like, people are missing as part of this value layer. And I think it's the entire world is going to be, decentralized in that way, where value will be transmitted natively digitally on the internet, whereas right now it's not, right? Even though you've got the banking system and you might think it's digital, in reality it's not actually fully digital. It's essentially connecting into maybe a more archaic system. And so that's the first part. The second part that I think is very, very incredible is we've come up with a technology now in this, past decade and a half, where now anyone in the world can instantaneously create a wallet, and that means they can now have borrowing, savings, and lending products, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you think about the world and where we're at right now. Now, in the United States, that might not be a big problem, right? Unless you maybe have like very bad credit or something, you might have challenges around this, but it's not a huge problem. So you don't think about it every day. But now look at Latin America, look at Sub-Saharan Africa, look at, Central Asia. You've got these problems where 1 billion people are cut out of the system because they don't have access to banking effectively. That could be for a number of reasons. But now, instantaneously, zero cost, they can have, basically digital accounts with borrowing, lending, and savings products. This is going to impact and change the lives of over 1 billion people. And the reason why some of this exists right now and why it doesn't work for those billion people are a few reasons. But one is cost. Two, banks, international banks cut off local banks in some of these countries. And so they can't access the global banking system, which now you can digitally and natively. And then third, they're getting cut off because of, say, like a broad stroke KYC and anti-money laundering regulation. But those billion people, I can pretty much guarantee you the vast majority of them are great people, right? They shouldn't be cut off because of affluence or because of their social economic status. And so this is actually creating a better system. And then the third part that's an interesting one is we had sort of this whole movement over a few years ago around NFTs. And everyone heard about NFTs, and a lot of people have very bad experiences with NFTs, and rightfully so, right? It was realistically, a lot of it was a bubble. A lot of it was even used in nefarious ways from certain actors to extract value from the public. But think about the technology that's there, right? So this is the first way in human history to track ownership in a digital world fully natively. And this is very critical because you could almost argue that it's, basic human need or basic human principle to value ownership of things, right? It's the reason why we look for ownership in like a house. We look for ownership in like a car. We look for ownership in all these different ways. And so to think that we don't need to do this digitally as the world is moving digital is naive. So this is actually going to be critical as we go forward, because the only way we can operate more and more effectively in a digital world is to actually be able to track digital ownership effectively. And so not necessarily from NFTs like itself, but that same technology is actually allowing us for the first time in human history to track ownership digitally, which is very critical, I think, to human survival and to thrive. And so this is actually very exciting. I think we're going to see more and more of this technology being leveraged in that way.
So thank you for that. So when you look at, I know for me, it shocked me that I never really thought about it. Let me put it this way, about people not having identity. And in those countries where they didn't have identity, and there were a whole bunch of other reasons, there's a lot of things taking place to give them an ecosystem. And that's when I really started understanding what decentralization would be able to provide to society and the impact it could make. When you look at the finance system, how do you evaluate, the DeFi and the fintech areas as they come out with these protocols on a digital side? Is it the same kind of evaluation process, or is it different because it is digital?
So there are going to be aspects that are different, right? And we obviously run a venture capital firm, and so we evaluate 200 to 500 companies a month, and we go deep on them in this space. But keep in mind, like the way that we're looking at this industry right now is I think we're going to end up sort of with two very clear paths. And I think both are going to end up thriving and succeeding, but both in very different ways, right? So one, you've got this regulated path that's sort of emerging, right? You're seeing a lot of that right now. You're seeing stablecoin regulation. You're seeing probably going to be more and more regulation, more major banks come into the space, and they're going to look at things like how to digitize the stock exchange instead of it being, 9 to 5. It's not even 9 to 5, right? The hours are worse. But instead of it basically being 9 to 5, how is it going to be 24 hours, like 24/7 instead of 5 days a week as well, right? And so, like, these types of things, I think, are going to change from a more regulated standpoint. But then you've got this other path, right? And this other path that's actually fully decentralized, that can't really be entirely regulated, that is probably the path that's going to go bank those billion people. Because if we're saying with all the technology we have today, we can't bank those billion people, like, I disagree with that answer. I think it's actually a choice in which, like, that effort's just not made. But we have the technology, we have the ability, right? And there's even certain things that are happening to just cut out those systems because it's, or those people in those countries, because it's easier, right? It's something called de-risking, where major international banks choose to not work with banks in certain countries. So if, like, for example, you take Zimbabwe, if the American banks or the British banks don't want to work with the banks in Zimbabwe because they think there's a risk overall, because they don't know where the money is going to get transferred from any of those customers, they might cut that country off entirely and all the banks in that country, and therefore that country is then more disconnected from the global system. And, like, this is actually a very big problem. The UN talks about it a lot, and we've worked with the UN as well, and on some of these issues. And so this to me is not an okay answer. I don't think that's acceptable to say a billion people should be cut out of a system. Like, that is not the way that we should be approaching it. And so that sort of unregulated path, I think, is where it's going to solve more of that, because the regulated path is the path we're currently on in some ways, right? Like, the traditional world is the more regular one. That's the path that's already decided to cut out the billion people. And so I think you're going to have this alternative path that's already there, that's just going to continue to thrive and grow. And that's where you're going to be able to, more effectively use a lot of these currencies, as you can today, use a lot more of these currencies when you disagree with your government and you think they're printing too much money, right? Which you're seeing in Nigeria, and you're seeing, the Naira with a lot of volatility, and you're seeing massive adoption of stablecoins. You're seeing it in Latin America right now, where there's distrust on certain governments on what they're supposed to be doing, and central banks what they're supposed to be doing. And I think you're going to essentially create these alternative systems already in these countries, because historically, as a consumer or as a citizen, you weren't able or allowed, or there was no technology or ability to choose if you support your country's currency or policies.
That's true.
And the only way you might have had was if it was democracy, or have the ability to vote. And if you didn't have democracy, you didn't even have that aspect. But now, pretty much anywhere in the world, and this is going to become a big factor over the next 10 years and going forward, you could just choose not to use the currency even, right? Like, there's challenges to that, right? But you could choose, because of technology, because of the internet, because of all these other things, you now could choose to just not even use the currency. You could transact in US dollars or other stable coins. You could have your business interact digitally on the internet and maybe not even have to operate locally. And if it did operate locally, if more and more people join that system, more people could be fine to transact in, say, US dollar stable coins or a different stable coin altogether. And so you may not need to use your local currency, as much. And if you are not using your local currency as much, that's a big loss of vote of confidence on the government, but two, it's going to create big problems for that country unless they make those people happy, right? And so it almost becomes a check and balance where consumers, citizens actually are gaining a lot of power because of this technology.
Wow, and that's really true. So when you look at some of the sectors that are taking place, who's coming on board or who's adopting the blockchain and scaling up with it? Do you see some industries or sectors moving more quickly in the blockchain arena than others, or more seed companies, or what are the trends that you are seeing in blockchain, and who's adopting it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from one of the big trends that's sort of like front and center right now is anything sort of downstream, like stable coins and downstream from stable coins. So you saw for example, regulation in the US around stablecoin legislation, which was, in reality, a good thing in some ways, right? So you now have clarity on regulation in the US, right? And that I think has triggered a few things sort of simultaneously or in anticipation, right? You had a $1 billion acquisition of Bridge, which was an on and off ramp company, right? You've got a number of other on and off ramp companies related, and you had Circle go public, right? So multi-billion dollar company,
Sure.
Circle go public. Then you've got sort of that downstream from stablecoin. So like you've got on and off ramp. So how do you get in and out of digital assets easily, right? From your traditional banking system, so in and out. Without those mechanisms working, it almost creates a chokehold on the industry, right? And so that working efficiently is important. So you've got now a number of companies that are accelerating very, very fast. Bridge had their $1 billion acquisition. You've got companies like Hi-Fi, which is the company in New York, doing extremely well, growing extremely fast. And so you've got a number of players sort of on that on and off ramp piece. Then you've got sort of remittances. Now, this is a big one because now instead of it being, say, within your own country on and off ramps, it's almost how do you remit money back home effectively? And instead of it taking 5 days with Western Union or a week, or even impacting like there's a lot of fraud oftentimes with these Western Union transactions or MoneyGram transactions. Well, how do you do that now instantaneously without that risk? Because you can, right? And that exists. And so now you've got companies that are doing that. We've got a company called Credit, which is a company out of sub-Saharan Africa and out of New York that's doing incredibly well, right? I mean, in the last couple of years, they've already now transacted, in the billions of dollars that they've been, moving back and forth. They're licensed in many different countries and jurisdictions, and just incredible, incredible progress that you're seeing. And so that whole remittance side with digital assets as sort of the value layer that's moving, I think is going to help to, one, save a lot of people money that's hard-earned dollars, right? Like losing 10% or 8% on a transaction because you're sending money home and it's a $200 transaction. Like that's the cost of putting food on your table effectively. That's the cost of your child's education, right? Like these are actually very, very important factors that you're solving by bringing down these costs to ideally sub 3%, even lower, right? That's one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is how do you sort of bring down remittance costs or ability to move money sub 3%? For a lot of these people, this is life changer, right? So that's a really important one. Then you've got sort of payments. And payments in westernized or more developed countries is less interesting. But as you move into the developing world, into emerging economies, I think this becomes more valuable because, like we talked about, some of the distrust, some of the ability to use a stable coin that's, not your local currency because that's not stable, because you don't trust the central government or the central bank. You've got, some of these countries we're talking about not only 5 or 10% inflation or 20% inflation or 30%, we're talking about 100% or 200% or 300% inflation. Like these numbers are not sustainable for anyone, right? In any economy. I mean, even you look at, in North America, Canada, US, UK, like in these westernized countries, we're having a tough time with inflation. And those numbers, the government, I think, is publishing 10% in some cases. I think it's still a lot more than that, just based on every time I've been to the grocery store, to the pump, or anything like that. But those are still bearable, and it's difficult, but they're somewhat bearable. If you talk about 100% inflation, 200% inflation a year, like these are unbearable in some of these countries. And so you need to have these alternatives. And so payments then creates the ability to now use an alternative currency for paying, and you can almost cut out that national currency in some ways from your everyday life. And that's going to become more of a factor over the next 10 years, because keep in mind, this technology and this ability to do it effectively, we're only talking about the last couple of years. Like it's taken time for different pieces of the Web3 economy to mature, to develop, to improve, experiences to improve, UIs to improve, like, blockchains to improve. And so the costs of transactions are lower. We're only getting to that point now where this is now more and more effective, which is why you're seeing billions and billions of dollars in transactions literally happening daily in these emerging economies now, and remittances, et cetera, related to this with stablecoins.
So when you talk about the blockchain and the adoption of it, interoperability, a lot of the C-suites, they're concerned about the interoperability of the blockchains. How is that working? What's happening in that arena at this time? Could you share some information about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I think like most companies don't need to worry about it that much. I think like if you're a pure native Web3 company, yes, there's an aspect of it, but we tell our companies, right? Like, if you go back 5 years, could I tell you, which blockchains were going to survive and thrive? Like we had our hunches. Some of those were right, some of those were wrong,
Hmm.
right? In 5 more years from now, am I going to be able to tell you with absolute certainty which ones are going to thrive and dominate versus which aren't? Like I have some hunches, but some are going to be right and some are going to be wrong, right? And so think about it in the same way where you know, you're just gonna be able to swap one for the other, and the consumer's not even gonna realize,
Okay.
right? And it's going to be fine in the same way that, you know, a lot of people in reality swap from using maybe like eBay and maybe still use eBay, but now maybe they also use Marketplace, maybe now they also use
Hmm.
Amazon, right? And it wasn't a huge friction point, right? And in the same
Exactly.
way, like it's gonna even be easier because for eBay to Amazon, the consumer had to change something. On this, it's almost gonna be a back end change, right? And you're not even gonna realize as a consumer. And so it's not gonna have a huge impact. There's gonna be easier and easier ways for these things to happen, and it's already happening. And so as that technology shifts, as it gets better, it's almost going to be like a software update. You could almost think of it like that, like your iPhone updates in the background. It's
Oh,
almost just going
cool.
to get updated in the background, right?
Hmm.
Because like some developers are going to have to make a switch to on a certain angle and everything's going to be updated, right? And so you could almost think of it like that. I don't even think this is a big worry on which blockchains are going to win versus not from the main consumers. I think you just
Hmm.
use what's already out there as consumer related products, and a lot of that's going to be either on Ethereum or Solana, maybe a few on Sui or Avalanche. But like when those developers need to switch it, they will switch it if they need to, right? In 5 years from now, and 10 years from now, if technology has changed.
So let's go to tokenization because tokenization is being discussed a lot now. And what hurdles or challenges are still there or that exist with tokenization of real world assets? Who's doing it real well and who's kind of like fumbled with the ball?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we're talking about, trillions of dollars of assets that are going to be tokenized. And, this has been a really interesting journey for me because I pretty much got involved in that space originally as an advisor of a company called Polymath, and this was, now almost I think 8 years ago, 7.5, 8 years ago, and we sort of coined the term security token there. We sort of came up with the idea of assets are going to be tokenized, and
Hmm.
and it's been a long journey. Like we were early on the mark there realistically, and it's been a long journey where now the market's starting to recognize the value of this tokenization, and also technology's matured a lot, right? And and so this has actually gotten very interesting because now you've got BlackRock talking about trillions of dollars of tokenization with Larry Fink talking about it all over. And I think this is, a really, really big moment because I think what you're going to start to see is, you know, it's just a better system, right? And so you can get rid of, for example, when you need to settle transactions right now, oftentimes it's like T plus two, like time plus 2 days.
Hmm.
This can be instantaneous. Like clearinghouses in reality, it's more efficient with just a single ledger that's going to be effective on this. And so you don't necessarily even need some of this legacy infrastructure that you have because a lot of this will have to be done more manually, even though it's like technology assisted. Now we're
Hmm.
talking about almost a native digital solution instead of what currently exists, which I would call sort of more like technology assisted systems, right? And so you've got, all stock markets are going to basically, I think, move to fully digital, fully efficient, right? Which I think is a better system, right? Right now, you've got a system where some people are allowed to trade before hours open or after hours close. You see, after hours trading as an example, but consumers can't do that. Like, this is not a fair system. Like, it should just be 24/7 and everyone's got the same playing field, right? And then you take all the other things that could be tokenized. Like, think about all of the commodities markets. So all of your gold and copper and oil and all of this could be 24/7 markets, right? Your real estate could essentially effectively just fully be tokenized. And firstly, for the purpose of just it's a better tracking system, right? Like like having to go to a municipality to figure out who owns what and then make sure there's no issues and then trust that there's security around it. Like it's still a better system to just have this on a ledger and have it documented and have it transparent. And obviously you still want to maintain privacy rules, but you can do that already. And so I think all of these things start to move to that direction.
So, I was thinking about the audience. There's probably some people in the audience that don't understand tokenization. How would you explain that in basic terms? They're
I mean, I
starting to
think the
hear it.
simplest form is it's just like an advanced record keeping system or accounting system, right? Like a big part of blockchain is just
Mhm.
an advanced record keeping system that is transparent, that is, auditable, that is chronological, that is immutable, and so that it can't be changed or manipulated. And if someone were to change something, you know exactly who changed and exactly when. Like it's a system that's just more like foolproof, I guess, right? And that's going to help in a lot of different ways. And so, and then keep in mind, you're getting rid of all of the overhead costs around this, right? So you think about the savings right now that you could achieve, it starts to grow and it starts to be more effective. Like that is going to become again a bigger factor over the next 10 years because over the last 10 years, it was still harder to use some of these blockchains. There was still a lot
Mhm.
of like on-ramp of knowledge. That's all getting easier, all getting simpler, products are getting better. But now you'd have a system that doesn't have all those overhead costs that you'd have to maintain it, etc. Right? And so you have a better system in reality. And that's again like a digital native first solution, which I think is game changing in a lot of these aspects.
Thank you. So when you look at DAOs and governance and the blockchain, there seems to be a lot of talk with the DAOs and the type of governance and changes and those that are ranking. Can you help people understand how that's going to impact society as we move forward as well?
Yeah, so DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. I think this is we're still early in this life cycle, right? And so you think about how society runs right now, right? Say governments elected generally not necessarily the most qualified individuals, but they're the most popular individuals, right? So it's a popularity contest in some respect, right? Like they don't necessarily have the best credentials. Like you're not taking the best CEO in your country and making them, the president or prime minister, right? You're basically doing essentially a popularity contest, but there's some credentials because like the public's essentially vetting
Hmm.
the people that run. Then you look at your companies. Your companies are the best people typically, right? That are running those companies, or they're getting fired by their boards. And so you actually have a system that's more effective for corporate governance in reality than you have for political governance, right? Or country governance. And that system essentially values and rewards generally the best person. Obviously, there's still corporate politics, but generally is pretty good, especially at the companies that survive. The ones that don't do it well maybe don't survive or don't do well,
Hmm.
right? And what you have with DAOs is almost a version of, you know, the public helping to drive it or the public nominating and putting their votes or control behind a certain group and then almost helping to govern that. And a DAO can have all sorts of governance related to it. So you could copy a little bit more of that corporate structure and how the boards work and nominating and hiring and firing, like say the executive team or the CEO and his plan, right? Or her plan. Or you could go more in the direction of even the way it currently works with like a popularity contest. And there's all sorts of different forms that are going to emerge from it. Right now, I think there's been a problem in the industry around DAOs, and it's just early, right? And there's a lot of kinks and a lot of things to iron out. Some of the problems around it, I think, early on have been, people are trying to transition these companies too early, right? Because like you need very clear leadership early on. And so people are creating these companies, and they're like, 1 year after creating the company, they're going to try to move it over to a system that allows for, say, like public voting or token holder
Hmm.
voting, and the company's not foundationally stable enough yet, right? It's early, like it's not making a ton of revenue. It's dependent on that person or people that are in that executive team still very critically. It hasn't grown and matured into a bigger system or a bigger company or bigger foundation or more solid foundation. And so that's been a problem. I think you transition these companies that aren't stable, that aren't like sorted out even a lot of internal governance, and then of course it's not going to work. And so I think there's still a lot of work into these, probably need to be transitioned over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, um effectively. Or maybe there's other ways that'll sort of evolve from it, but there's a lot of flexibility. It's early, and so with anything that's early, there's going to be a lot of challenges around it. So I think a lot of these DAOs have still struggled. Some have worked reasonably well with their token holders being able to vote and sort of on key things, etc. But a lot of these DAOs, you got to keep in mind, they also mask as a DAO or a decentralized autonomous organization, but they're really not, right? If you
Okay.
tell me, go talk to these 3 people and you can make something happen with that organization, it's probably not a DAO, right? Like that's not really what the definition of trying to decentralize authority and governance would be, right? That sounds very similar to a pretty centralized structure, right? And so I think there's still some of that happening right now, which I think will take time to progress and advance.
Yeah, I'm thinking of one now that I'm aware of. So thank you for that clarification. I'm sure others can think about that too. Before we close, because I'm trying to keep my eye on the time, but I have so many questions. When you look at medical or clinical trials or the medical space, the clinical space, for those that are in healthcare and healthcare AI, how does the convergence of AI and blockchain, what is the real impact that we're going to be seeing in the future? And where are we today in regards to that technology in that space?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of parts to that, right? So I think one is when we talk about AI, we talked about earlier sort of the auditability of AI, right? And the clarity on this and making sure that, you're essentially able to have very clear records, very, not manipulated. And then ideally these things are sort of getting more to the public, even in some ways, on, all of these different trials, what happened. Like this all being on immutable ledgers is probably valuable for just like humanity going forward consistently,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that layer being auditable, transparent is valuable. Now, from a medical, like say drug discovery perspective, I think that's not necessarily needs a ton of blockchain. I think there's people trying to do different things, but not necessarily everything needs blockchain. So like while you might use it for like the auditability, the transparency, the AI side to help with these discoveries, in the actual development, I mean, these things are just very expensive because of a lot of regulatory requirements. And I think it's, there's obviously some safety protections as part of that, but I'm a big believer in even just figuring out other methods as well. Like what are natural ways to heal? What are things that we've learned over thousands of years as humanity that I think has all been forgotten in sort of an age of, you know, um, in an age of just like reactionary medicine, right? Which is concerning. And I'm not saying that reactionary medicine is not valuable or life-saving in certain respects, but we've gone away from preventative medicine. We've
Prevent.
gone away
Right.
from natural remedies that people have figured out for thousands of years, right? It's naive to assume nobody knew anything before the 30s or the 40s or the 50s related to health, right? Whereas like our current system's almost just like figure out a pill to take and then take it, right? Or figure an injection to give someone or whatnot, which I think is not the best system. And so, I think as we have better AI, as we have better technology, as we have better immutability, we then become and put ourselves in a position where it becomes easier to leverage and use real information. Hopefully, that we can filter through real information because there's just such a sheer amount of information to then determine what are the best approaches, what are the best outcomes, right? Being put in situations even around vaccines or whatever that people can then trust the data, trust and see everything that's happening, having transparency. I think this stuff is more and more important. I think people are demanding it more and
Hmm.
should, in reality, if we're talking about freedoms, you should have the ability to choose what you want to do around these things, right? Of course, you don't want it to harm others. So like I get the arguments on sort of both sides, but there needs to be an aspect, I think, of people being able to like make their own decisions. I think there's becoming more and more distrust on governments overall. I think there's becoming more and more distrust in even like doctors and things like this because you're not always getting the solutions that you want. And so I think you're seeing people take these things into their own hands, doing more medical tests on their own, seeing and tracking more of their own data. And I think these are all things that are like exciting about sort of the evolution of medicine that I think we're going to see, because I don't think the system's doing a good enough job for people, right? And I think we're moving in that direction where you could do this very cost effectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even myself, I'll sort of share, right? Like I actually upload all of my own medical records up to ChatGPT and ask all sorts of questions and figure out different things I should be doing. And I actually think it's incredibly valuable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And of course, you've got to be concerned on maybe there's certain privacy concerns for certain people around that, but like you can learn a lot more and ask a lot more questions than you're going to get with 5 minutes with your doctor,
That's true.
right? And so there's things to learn. That doesn't mean you believe everything, but then ask more questions and learn more about it, right? And so this is actually very, very valuable technology that you're getting with AI around these things as well, that I think are like very fascinating and exciting sort of as we move forward.
So with that said, like your patient information, your patient files, and being able to have all your files on a blockchain, is that a reality, or is that still in
So it is
test
a
mode, or is it real yet?
like here's the problem. So it is a better system, right? Like this is exactly what blockchain is designed for. Like we're talking about a system that many different parties can access, many different parties can see, certain parties can write to that information. You
Mm-hmm.
know exactly who wrote what information exactly when, all in a unified system. That's essentially what a blockchain is. It is a better system than you're probably seeing. Do I think that's going to be the system that enters into a lot of the medical industry? Probably not. Okay.
Okay.
And part of that is the human problem around this, right? Different
Mm.
humans are going to be pitching different systems that they're going to want to get paid billions of dollars to go build. But this blockchain system is basically built. You could probably, you still, there's a lot of tailoring, a lot of things you need to do, but like you don't need thousands of developers to go do this, right? And like there's just certain companies that have lobbying efforts that have all these other things that are going to be able to extract a lot of money from governments and going to be able to pitch as an organization that is probably different from probably what is the best solution, which I think is going to be these decentralized effective systems for these types of purposes.
So what businesses or entrepreneurs or organizations are your customers, or who do you talk to? Who should be contacting you?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we invest in, startups, founders, people that have visions that want to change the world and have the ability to, go do it, and the enthusiasm and the resilience to go do it, because it's not easy. I think it's the hardest job in the world is to go build a startup, to, cut back on your means, cut back on time with your family when you could be spending time with your family, working 19 hours a day to go build something that's going to stand the test of time, that's going to go help a lot of people. Like that's not easy. That's a huge sacrifice that founders and
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs make every day, right? And so, founders that have that, excitement, that vision, that ability to go build something, let us know what you're working on. We're happy to, help see if, there's something we can do to help both from, advice and capital. And so just reach out to us on our website, blockchainff.com, or find us on Twitter or LinkedIn or, any other platform. Feel free to message anyone on our team or myself. And, our goal is to actually look at every single company that does share stuff with us, right? And so we actually do go through, all of these different ideas. And of course, we can't back them all, right? Even though there's a lot of ideas that we'd love to back, that we've just got to obviously focus on certain things as much as anyone else has to, right? And but as much as we can also help, maybe it might help with other investors, etc., right? And so we're there to basically go help make founders visions a reality.
So I have to ask you this because I was impressed by UNICEF when I was taking classes out at Berkeley and what they were doing with blockchain. Do you see other nonprofits or organizations going into the blockchain arena for supply
So
chain? Or tell me what's happening with the nonprofits. Are they holding on to the traditional world, or do a few of them really start moving forward with the blockchain and Web3 and take advantage of the benefits?
yeah, so now here again, right? Like this is a much better system for transparency and accountability. Like,
Mm-hmm.
all of, I'm sure you've got causes that you donate to that you're passionate about. I've got a number that I'm passionate about that I donate to. And one of the things is, you would want that transparency on where is that money going? Is it actually helping the people you think it's helping? How much of it is going towards that? How much is, effectively not making it there? How do you cut a lot of that overhead so more of it helps the cause that you're trying to help, right? And that you can already do more effectively with blockchains. Now, the problem is there's also an entire side of a lot of people, a lot of humans that are in these organizations that you may not need as many people, right? Like if you don't need half as many people on the finance department, if you might not need half as many people on, certain other aspects because everything's just tracked digitally. Now that's a completely different decision, right? And so there's always going to be the side of the human friction that's going to be, we don't want to implement this because it might affect some jobs. And the people that are deciding to use the technology might even be some of the people that get impacted on their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's always the challenge with any technology. You're seeing that with AI right now as well. Right. But I think if you were to look 20 years, 30 years, 40 years down the road, you are going to see this because as soon as more charities start doing it, more nonprofits start doing it, you would be more comfortable as a donor at certain points as you're seeing more choice. You're saying, hey, 98% of the money is actually getting to the cause that I want here. And here I don't even have clarity of numbers, but maybe it's 30% or 40%. Like, you're going to probably choose the one that's 98% getting to the cause that you want, right? There's still going to be some overhead, some costs, right? But you have the transparency, you have the clarity, you know it's getting to where it needs to. Like, and so as you start getting that choice, consumers are going to prefer it, which then is going to force more charities and nonprofits to have to do that, right? But it's going to take some time because some are going to have to do it because they have the right intentions. And then it's going to force more as consumers see choice to then want more of that. And so consumers are going to demand more of it. I think at some point, still early, but I think you're going to start seeing that at some point. And it's going to be better for everyone in reality.
Okay, I keep getting ready to close, and I get one more question because I'm running out of time. So, those that are investing in Web3, are there any blind spots from an investment standpoint that you think people need to be aware of, or that you see overall that continuous trend, and it's like, why don't they get it?
There's always blind spots, right? Like there's always things you don't know. There's always like unknown unknowns, and then there's like known unknowns, right? And
Okay.
so, like, you know, I've been telling sort of quite a lot of people, recently. I think one of the most important skills right now of our generation is going to be knowing what you don't know, right? Because if you know what you don't know and you know how to ask and understand what you don't know, you can now pretty much get the answers leveraging AI. Think about AI is going to continue to get better.
Yeah.
And so you can figure out what you don't know. You can always get blindsided by an unknown unknown, right? Like AI ChatGPT launches, like that changed the world, right? Like the
Hmm.
day it launched and it's continued to improve, right? Um, but having said that, I think as a major movement, this is all going to continue, I think, to grow. That doesn't mean every single thing in here is going to win, right? There's going to be a lot of failures, as with any hyper competitive technology. And so there'll be a lot of company failures. There'll be a lot of blockchain failures that won't make it through because they're just not going to be competitive enough, or they're going to get hacked and had, some gap on security, and there's going to be a hack. And the thing with Web3 is we're talking about there's no recourse, right? Like with your bank, there's going to be a recourse system because it's a more centralized system. With crypto, there's tends to not be a recourse system, right? And so if funds get hacked because of poor security, generally that's not reversible, right? And so these are challenges that you're going to have and be careful of in this industry, right? So there are definitely a lot of risks to it.
Yeah, there are. Okay, we're near the end. So, what do you want the audience to take away from our conversation today? What's the biggest thing?
Absolutely. I hope that you got some insights on, what we're doing at Blockchain Founders, on how we're helping to support entrepreneurs. If you want to learn more about sort of blockchain, Web3, understand more of it, you can check out the TV show that we just launched on Amazon Prime called Crypto Nights. It's with Adrian Grenier, if you remember Vinny Chase from Entourage, with Kim Lee from Bling Empire, many other, really incredible, titans from the Web3 space, many incredible startups. It's almost like a Shark Tank like show. So I think it's a fun way to, sort of understand and learn about the industry. So definitely check that out. And then if you're working on an interesting idea, feel free to reach out to us, right? We're always happy to look and help understand and help provide insights.
And how do they reach out to you? What do you like
So
to be
just
connected by? LinkedIn or
Yeah,
website?
so LinkedIn, X, you could come to our site on blockchainff.com and you can even share anything you're working on with us. We've got a form that helps us understand sort of what you're working on. And then I look at pretty much all of those as well. So, happy to take a look and help support, aspiring entrepreneurs to, help, build a better and brighter future.
All right, then. I'm glad you're here. And thank you so much for spending time on Pivoting to Web3 podcast, because we are shaping tomorrow together. Thanks for tuning in to Pivoting to Web3 podcast. If you're a developer, innovator, or AI expert with insights to share, or if you're looking to partner, let's connect. Visit MitchellUniversalNetwork.com and be part of the conversation. Want more content? Check out my playlist for more episodes. See you next time.